We begin our broadcast in Southern Africa, where Zimbabwe's opposition leader is rejecting the re-election of President Emmerson Mnangagwa. Citizens Coalition for Change leader Nelson Chamisa said, quote, "It is clear that we're rejecting the election as a sham." Mnangagwa on Sunday welcomed the results of an election which he said was peaceful and demonstrated the country's democracy was mature. Addressing a press conference at State House in Harare, Mnangagwa dismissed criticism of the election, which an opposition leader said was a gigantic fraud. However, two observer groups say police raided their data centers and arrested staff and volunteers so they could not independently verify the results. Observers from the Southern African Development Community and from the African Union are also criticizing the election process. The Election Commission announced late Saturday that Mnangagwa 80 had won the election with 52.6% of the vote, while Chamisa received 44%. Mnangagwa first became president when longtime strongman Robert Mugabe was toppled in a 2017 military coup after 37 years in power. His first term was marked by runaway inflation, currency shortages, and soaring unemployment. Zimbabwean President Emmerson Mnangagwa was re-elected for a second and final five-year term late Saturday in results announced over the weekend. Opposition leader Nelson Chamisa and his party, the Citizens Coalition for Change, rejected the election results. Meanwhile, international election observers say the voting in Zimbabwe did not meet international standards and was conducted in a climate of fear. In contrast, the observer team from the Southern African Development Community says voting was peaceful. For more perspective, VOA's Ndiho spoke to Henry Muguzi, the African Elections Observer Network coordinator based in Kampala, Uganda.
At the Secretariat of the African Election Observers Network, we have already branded it a zombie election. We think it does not have any, does not tick any box that qualifies it to be otherwise. We have also gone ahead and said and called on African nations to wake up. Because if you look at the regime that is conducting this election in Zimbabwe, the regime that is headed by President Mnangagwa is a military regime because, you know, its foundation is coup d'etat. And you cannot expect democracy from a regime whose process, which was constituted through a very undemocratic process.
You just alluded to the fact that this is a regime, therefore meaning that it's a regime that came in by other means necessary other than an election. But the last time I checked, Mnangagwa was duly elected president of Zimbabwe. And right. So he has a legitimate right to run for re-election.
If you look at how he comes into force, the military takes over and puts him there. It means therefore he's a figurehead of the military. And we still think that the military in Zimbabwe has a very big say in how ZANU-PF is being run. If you look at the tendencies, the conduct, the behavior, the captivity of state institutions, you just see, you know, the military at play, and therefore we think he's a front of the military, but behind the face Mnangagwa is the militaristic regime that took over power through a military coup.
There was a lot of enthusiasm leading to the elections. A lot of young people were excited. People who have not voted were voting for the first time. Millions more are registered to vote. But from what I've seen, a lot of people have characterized this election as not free, fair, or credible.
There was quite a lot of enthusiasm on the part of young people who thought that they turn out and vote so that they can put an end to this regime. And of course, as you saw, many of them were disappointed, disenfranchised, because they reached the polling stations and polling materials would not be delivered. In some places, they were delivered 10 hours late. In the rural areas, there were disinformation. There was disinformation because, as we understand now, that ZANU-PF placed desks that were conducting exit interviews. And they were told that the ZANU has a way of knowing who has voted because they can sequence and know the timings. They've gone to the polling station.
If what you're saying is true or has a semblance of truthness to it, then that amounts to intimidation, voter intimidation.
We have recorded, if you read the preliminary statements of many of the international observation missions, the SADC observation mission, the African Union observation mission, the European Union as well, they have all alluded to the intimidation that was out there. They've alluded to the voter suppression. They have alluded to issues of the delays that disenfranchise the voters. They have also alluded to other forms of intimidation that was extended to the citizen observers themselves. After this election, it will be difficult for many organizations out there in Zimbabwe to stick their necks out to call themselves election observers, because this is going to have a chilling effect, and this is bound to extend to the other generations that may have an interest in observing elections as citizens of their country.
That was Henry Muguzi, coordinator of the African Elections Observer Network, speaking to VOA's Ndiho.